In the grand tradition of beings with too much time and even more ego, the Galactic Dragon Hunting Consortium had made it their life's work to rid the universe of dragons. Not because dragons were particularly dangerous, mind you, but because someone somewhere had decided that killing magnificent creatures was the ultimate status symbol. You know, like owning a yacht, but with more fire and significantly less practical storage space. The consortium's flagship vessel, the Ego Compensator, though officially named the Starfire Predator, drifted through space with all the subtle grace of a flying brick covered in chrome and bad decisions. Aboard this monument to questionable life choices sat three beings who had somehow convinced themselves they were the galaxy's premier monster hunters. Captain Vex Thornscale was their fearless leader, and by fearless, I mean he had never met a mirror he didn't like, or a tactical retreat he wouldn't call a strategic repositioning. Standing 7 feet tall, with scales that shimmered like oil on water, Vex had the kind of voice that suggested he gargled with gravel and expensive whiskey. His species had evolved from lizards, though evolution had apparently forgotten to include humility in the package. He wore enough military decorations to make a Christmas tree jealous, most of which he'd awarded to himself. "Gentlemen," Vex announced to his crew, because he was the type who called everyone gentlemen regardless of their actual gender or species. "Today we make history. Today we claim the last dragon in the known galaxy." Professor Quill Finbottom, whose name sounded like a rejected Harry Potter character, was their resident expert on everything dragon. Picture a flamingo that had attended too many academic conferences and developed an unhealthy relationship with data spreadsheets. His feathers were perpetually ruffled, partly from excitement and partly from the 3 espressos he consumed every morning. Quill had spent the last 47 years cataloging dragon behavioral patterns, which was impressive considering dragons had been extinct for most of those years. "According to my calculations," Quill began, adjusting his tiny spectacles with one wing, "this final specimen should exhibit all the classic dragon characteristics: fire-breathing, treasure-hoarding, princess kidnapping, the full medieval package." Commander Blast Rockfist was their muscle, though calling him muscle was like calling a nuclear bomb a firecracker. He was essentially a walking boulder with anger management issues and a collection of explosives that would make a military contractor weep with joy. His species had evolved from rocks, which explained both his personality and his problem-solving methods. Everything looked like a nail to blast, probably because his hammer was a plasma cannon. "Just point me at the beast, Captain," Blast rumbled, his voice sounding like an avalanche with a head cold. "I'll blast it into next Tuesday, then blast next Tuesday just to be sure." The three of them stared at the view screen showing a small blue planet rotating peacefully in space. Earth, third rock from a rather unremarkable star, populated by bipedal mammals with an alarming tendency toward reality television and arguing about pineapple on pizza. "Sensors indicate the dragon is somewhere on the northern continent," Quill reported, consulting his ever-present tablet. "The energy signature is unlike anything we've encountered, more domesticated somehow." Vex waved dismissively. "Probably just weakened from age. These creatures become pathetic shadows of their former selves when there's no one left to terrorize. Mark my words, this will be our easiest hunt yet." Famous last words, as they say, though in this case they were more like famous words that would soon be laughed at by a park ranger and a dragon who preferred chamomile tea to virgin sacrifices. The ship descended toward Earth with all the ceremony of a lead balloon, its hull gleaming in the sunlight like a disco ball having an identity crisis. Below them, completely unaware of the approaching intergalactic hunting party, the planet Earth continued its day with typical human obliviousness to cosmic drama. Little did the consortium know they were about to encounter humanity's most dangerous weapon, the ability to treat the extraordinary as perfectly ordinary, and to kill epic narratives with kindness. The Ego Compensator landed in what the ship's computer cheerfully announced as a designated recreational area, which in human terms meant they'd just touched down in the middle of Yellowstone National Park. The landing was about as subtle as a rhinoceros in a china shop, complete with scorch marks, confused wildlife, and at least 3 car alarms going off in the distance. As the landing ramp lowered with a dramatic hiss that Vex had specifically programmed for maximum intimidation effect, the 3 hunters stepped out, ready to strike fear into the hearts of primitive natives. Instead, they were greeted by a man in a khaki uniform who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, holding a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone who'd seen it all and wasn't particularly impressed by any of it. Jake Morrison, park ranger extraordinaire and professional keeper of tourists from doing stupid things, looked up from his paperwork with the weary resignation of a man who'd already dealt with 2 bear encounters and a group of college kids trying to take selfies with a bison that morning. The sight of three armed aliens emerging from a spaceship ranked somewhere between mildly inconvenient and Tuesday on his scale of daily annoyances. "Let me guess," Jake said, not looking up from his clipboard. "You're here about the dragon." The three aliens stopped mid-dramatic entrance, which was particularly awkward for Vex, who had been in the middle of what he considered his most menacing pose. You know of the beast?" Vex sputtered, his prepared intimidation speech dissolving faster than cotton candy in a hurricane. "Oh yeah, Ember." Jake finally looked up, squinting slightly in the sunlight. "Big scaly gal lives up on Mount Washburn. Nice enough, though she's terrible at poker, keeps trying to bluff with a tail wag." He paused, seeming to notice their weapons for the first time. "You folks aren't planning on causing trouble, are you? Because I've got paperwork for that, and honestly it's a real pain." Quill's beak nearly fell off. "Did you just refer to the most feared predator in the galaxy as nice?" Jake shrugged with the casual indifference of a man who'd once spent 3 hours explaining to a tourist why they couldn't keep a rattlesnake as a pet. "I mean, she grows the best tomatoes in the county. Enters them in the state fair every year. Won second place last time, though, between you and me, I think the judges were a little prejudiced. Hard to argue with a blue ribbon when your competition breathes fire, you know?" Commander Blast stepped forward, his rocky features arranged in what he probably thought was a threatening scowl but looked more like someone trying to solve calculus. "Human, this creature is a menace to all life in the galaxy. It must be destroyed." "Destroyed?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Why would you want to destroy Ember? She volunteers at the local library on weekends, does story time for the kids. They love her voice work, though she does get a little carried away with the dragon characters." He chuckled. "Last week she accidentally melted a copy of Where the Wild Things Are during the climax. Mrs. Henderson wasn't thrilled, but the kids thought it was the best story time ever." The aliens exchanged glances that conveyed the universal confusion of beings who'd spent their entire careers building up to this moment, only to discover their legendary nemesis was apparently part of the local PTA. "Perhaps," Quill said carefully, consulting his tablet as if it might suddenly make sense of this situation. "You don't understand the danger. This is a dragon we're talking about. Fire-breathing, treasure-hoarding, village burning." "Oh, she breathes fire all right," Jake nodded seriously. "Really useful during barbecue season. And yeah, she collects stuff, but it's mostly interesting rocks and vintage postcards. As for village burning," he looked around the park with its intact visitor center and uncharred picnic tables. "I mean, she did accidentally start a small grass fire last month, but that was just because she sneezed while lighting the campfire. Happens to the best of us." Vex's eye twitched. This was not going according to the plan. In all his years of dragon hunting, never once had he encountered a situation where the local population treated the dragon like a beloved community member with a seasonal allergy problem. "You must take us to this dragon immediately," he commanded, trying to salvage some authority from the situation. Jake glanced at his watch. "Well, I suppose I could guide you up there, but just so you know, she's probably having her afternoon tea right about now. She gets cranky when interrupted, and cranky for Ember means accidentally setting things on fire. Not on purpose, mind you, just stress response." He started walking toward a trail, leaving 3 of the galaxy's most feared hunters standing in a parking lot, wondering how their epic quest had suddenly turned into what sounded suspiciously like a neighborhood social call. "Oh, and fair warning," Jake called back over his shoulder. "She's going to want to offer you cookies. It's considered rude to refuse, trust me on this one." The trek up Mount Washburn became a masterclass in cultural miscommunication, with Jake providing a running commentary that sounded like a nature documentary, while the 3 hunters interpreted every detail as evidence of their impending doom. "See that path there?" Jake pointed to a well-maintained trail with helpful wooden signs every few hundred yards. "Ember carved that out herself. Really thoughtful of her to make it wheelchair accessible, too." Quill frantically scribbled notes. "The beast has created strategic pathways for optimal hunting approaches. Note the tactical markers every measured distance." Jake glanced back at the bird alien with the expression of someone watching a conspiracy theorist explain how traffic lights were secretly mind control devices. "They're just trail markers, buddy, you know, so hikers don't get lost and wander off cliffs." "Exactly," Vex hissed, his scales practically vibrating with excitement. "She herds her prey along predetermined routes toward killing zones." They passed a clearing where several patches of earth showed recent digging, with neat rows of plants growing in organized sections. A small greenhouse sat at one end, its glass panels gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Oh good, her garden's coming along nicely this year," Jake observed. "Those are her prized tomatoes on the left, cucumbers in the middle, and I think she's trying carrots this year. Always said she had a green thumb, though technically they're more like green claws." Commander Blast's rocky features darkened. Scorched earth tactics. She's eliminated all natural vegetation to create clear sight lines. He pointed at the greenhouse. And that structure is obviously a command post. It's a greenhouse, rock for brains, Jake said, using the kind of patient tone usually reserved for explaining to 5-year-olds why they can't eat dirt. She grows seedlings in there during winter. Last year she donated 300 tomato plants to the local elementary school garden project. A breeding facility for biological weapons, Quill whispered, his feathers standing on end. Clearly she's developing some sort of vegetable-based chemical warfare. Jake stopped walking and turned around. Has anyone ever told you three that you might be overthinking things? Like, way overthinking things? To the point where it's actually impressive how wrong you can be about literally everything? They crested a ridge and came upon a series of large flat stones arranged in a circle, with what looked like mirrors or polished metal surfaces positioned at various angles around the clearing. Her solar collection system, Jake explained. Pretty clever setup, actually. She uses those reflectors to focus sunlight for heating water and charging her electronics. Beck's eyes gleamed with triumph. A solar energy weapon array. I knew it. She's preparing to incinerate entire cities from orbit. She's charging her iPad, you absolute walnut, Jake said, his patience wearing thinner than bargain store toilet paper. She's addicted to those hidden object games. Drives me nuts how she always asks for hints when we play together. As they continued climbing, they passed several trees with large, comfortable-looking platforms built into their branches. Each platform had what appeared to be small telescopes or viewing devices mounted on swivels. Bird-watching platforms, Jake said before any of the aliens could speak. Ember's really into ornithology, keeps detailed logs of migration patterns and species counts. She's contributed more data to the state bird survey than anyone else in the county. Will's tablet was practically smoking from overuse. Aerial reconnaissance and surveillance network. She's monitoring flight patterns for coordinated attacks. She's watching birds, Jake said, enunciating each word like he was speaking to someone with a severe head injury. For fun. Because she enjoys it, the same way some people enjoy Sudoku, or complaining about the weather. Commander Blast gestured toward a series of smoke signals rising from further up the mountain in regular patterned intervals. Communication signals. She's coordinating with other hostiles. Jake squinted at the smoke. Oh, that's her afternoon check-in with Gary. Gary? All three aliens asked in unison. Yeah, Gary Henderson. Runs the general store down in Mammoth. They play chess by smoke signal every Tuesday and Thursday. Ember's white pieces, Gary's black. She's been trying to teach him the Sicilian defense for months, but Gary's more of a straightforward attack kind of guy. The hunters stared at him in disbelief. You're telling us, Vex said slowly, that the last dragon in the galaxy is using ancient fire communication to play chess with a shopkeeper. Ancient fire communication? Jake laughed. Buddy, she's got a cell phone. The smoke signals are just because Gary thinks it's more authentic. Something about connecting with traditional games through traditional methods. Honestly, I think he just likes the excuse to burn stuff in his backyard. As they approached the final ridge before Ember's home, the sound of music drifted down from above. Not the ominous chanting or primal roars the hunters expected, but what sounded distinctly like someone humming along to classic rock. Is that Don't Stop Me Now by Queen? Quill asked, his analytical mind struggling to process this latest data point. Oh yeah, she loves Freddie Mercury, Jake grinned. Says he's the only human who really understood how to project your voice properly. She does a mean karaoke version, though she accidentally melted the microphone at Murphy's bar last month. They're still working on getting the insurance to cover Act of Dragon. The three hunters exchanged looks that conveyed the dawning realization that their epic quest was rapidly becoming the most anticlimactic adventure in galactic history. But they'd come this far, and pride, or perhaps sheer stubborn refusal to accept reality, drove them forward toward what they still hoped would be a suitably dramatic confrontation with the last dragon in the universe. They had no idea they were about to meet a creature whose most dangerous quality was her ability to make anyone feel guilty for not calling their mother more often. The final approach to Ember's home was nothing like what the Galactic Dragon Hunting Consortium had expected. Instead of a foreboding cave entrance carved into the mountainside, with skulls decorating the doorway, they found themselves standing before what could only be described as the world's most charming mountain cabin. If mountain cabins were typically built to accommodate residents who measured 30 feet from nose to tail. The structure was a masterpiece of practical architecture, with reinforced wooden beams that could support considerable weight and doorways wide enough for a creature with wings. Solar panels gleamed on the roof, the same ones they'd mistaken for a weapon array, and a satellite dish pointed skyward with the kind of precision that suggested someone who took their internet connection very seriously. A welcome mat by the front door read, "Home is where the horde is," surrounded by small potted plants that looked suspiciously well tended. "Remember," Jake said, turning to face the three hunters who were clutched their weapons like security blankets. "Be polite. Compliment her garden if you get the chance. And whatever you do, don't mention that time she accidentally barbecued Mrs. Patterson's cat." "She what now?" Vex's voice cracked like a teenager asking someone to prom. "Relax, Mr. Whiskers was fine. Just a little singed around the edges. Ember felt terrible about it for weeks. Bought him a whole case of fancy tuna as an apology." Before anyone could process this latest revelation, the front door opened with a gentle creak, and the most feared predator in the galaxy appeared in the doorway. Ember was without question a dragon. There was no mistaking the deep emerald scales that caught the late afternoon light like polished gemstones, or the impressive wingspan that she kept carefully folded to avoid knocking over the wind chimes hanging from the porch ceiling. Her head was elegantly serpentine, with intelligent golden eyes that held the kind of warmth usually reserved for favorite aunts and kindergarten teachers. What the hunters hadn't expected were the reading glasses perched delicately on her snout, or the floral apron tied around her considerable middle, or the fact that she was holding a steaming mug of tea in one carefully controlled claw, while balancing what appeared to be a crossword puzzle book in the other. "Yake!" Ember's voice was a rich contralto that would have been perfectly at home in a jazz club if jazz clubs typically hosted performers who could accidentally melt the piano. "Right on time for afternoon tea. I was just struggling with 7 across. Mythical creature known for hoarding. Honestly, the stereotypes these puzzle makers perpetuate." She looked up from her crossword and noticed the 3 aliens standing behind Jake like children hiding behind their father's legs at a family reunion. "Oh my, visitors! How wonderful!" Ember set down her tea and crossword, with the careful precision of someone who'd learned the hard way that enthusiasm and fragile objects don't always mix. "Welcome, welcome. I'm Ember, though I suppose Jake's already told you that. Please, come in. I just put on a fresh pot of chamomile, and I've got cookies cooling on the rack." Commander Blast, who had spent the entire hike mentally rehearsing his battle cry, found himself instead mumbling something that sounded vaguely like, "Thank you, ma'am." The interior of Ember's home was even more disorienting to the hunters' expectations. Instead of treasure piles and scattered bones, they found themselves in what could only be described as the coziest library in existence. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, with rolling ladders to reach the higher shelves. Comfortable reading chairs were positioned near windows to take advantage of natural light, and soft rugs covered the hardwood floors. The only thing that might have qualified as a hoard was an impressive collection of bookmarks, ranging from simple ribbon varieties to elaborate metal ones shaped like tiny dragons. "Please sit wherever you'd like," Ember said, gesturing toward chairs that had clearly been chosen for both comfort and structural integrity. "I'm afraid the furniture is a bit oversized, but I've learned that it's better to err on the side of caution when you weigh as much as a small aircraft." Vex, still clutching his plasma rifle like it might spontaneously develop the ability to explain this situation, cleared his throat. You are the dragon. The last dragon." "Oh my, is that what this is about?" Ember's golden eyes sparkled with what looked suspiciously like amusement. "Let me guess, you're here because of all that terrible beast nonsense that gets passed around the galaxy. Honestly, you'd think after 300 years the rumors would have died down." Professor Quill, his tablet forgotten in his wing, stared at the dragon, who was now bustling around a kitchen area that featured both standard appliances and what appeared to be a built-in fire pit for more specialized cooking needs. But you're supposed to be fierce, terrifying, a menace to all civilized species." Ember paused in her tea preparation and gave him a look that was equal parts pitying and maternal. "Sweetie, I'm a retired librarian. The most menacing thing I've done this week was give a stern talking to some teenagers who were being loud in the biography section." She returned to the kitchen area and began arranging cookies on a plate with the kind of care usually reserved for defusing bombs. "I know what you're thinking, but Ember, what about all the destruction? What about the terror? Well, let me tell you something about being a dragon." She turned back to face them, cookie plate in one claw, teapot in the other. "Do you know how hard it is to exist in a universe designed for smaller creatures when you're 30 feet long and occasionally sneeze fire? I once destroyed an entire shopping mall because I got startled by a car backfiring. Not on purpose, mind you. It was just reflex." Commander Blast, who was beginning to suspect that his extensive collection of dragon-slaying weapons might be overkill for this situation, managed to find his voice. "So you're not evil." "Evil?" Ember laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of silver bells. "Oh, honey, I volunteer at 3 different charities, I've never missed a PTA meeting, and I foster rescue cats when the local shelter gets overcrowded. The only evil thing about me is my addiction to true crime podcasts. And even then, I always root for the investigators." She began pouring tea, with the steady precision of someone who'd had considerable practice avoiding accidents. "The truth is, being a dragon in today's galaxy is mostly about learning to live quietly and not accidentally destroying things you care about. Do you know what the leading cause of property damage is among my people?" Enthusiastic tail wagging. "We're like golden retrievers, but with more fire and a tendency to hoard interesting bookmarks." As if to demonstrate her point, Ember's tail began to swish with pleasure at having company, and she immediately caught herself, wrapping it carefully around her feet like a cat settling in for a nap. "Jake tells me you've traveled a very long way to see me," she continued, offering the plate of cookies around with the kind of insistent hospitality that brooked no argument. "I do hope you'll stay for dinner. I'm making my famous 3-cheese lasagna, and I've been dying to try out this new tiramisu recipe I found online." The 3 hunters looked at each other, then at their weapons, then at the dragon who was currently fussing over whether they had enough sugar for their tea. Somewhere in the distance they could hear the sound of their entire worldview crumbling like a cookie that had been left out too long. It was Vex who finally managed to speak, his voice smaller than a whisper and twice as confused. You want to feed us dinner?" "Of course," Ember beamed, her smile revealing teeth that could have doubled as industrial equipment, but were currently being used only for the consumption of chamomile tea and homemade snickerdoodles. "It's not every day I get visitors from off-world. I have so many questions about galactic politics and whether they've finally fixed that pothole situation on Centauri Prime." And that was how the most feared dragon hunters in the galaxy found themselves sitting around a coffee table, eating cookies and discussing municipal infrastructure with their target, while their weapons sat forgotten in the corner like expensive paperweights that no one had the heart to throw away. Jake had been suspiciously quiet during the entire tea service, wearing the kind of smile that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment like a kid on Christmas morning. As Ember fussed over whether Commander Blast needed more sugar in his tea, which was hilarious, because the rock-based alien couldn't actually taste sugar but was too polite to mention it, Jake cleared his throat, with theatrical emphasis. "So, Ember," he said, his grin widening to borderline manic proportions, "maybe now would be a good time to tell our guests about the neighborhood association." Ember's golden eyes lit up like someone had just suggested her favorite topic of conversation. "Oh yes, how thoughtful of you to remember, Jake. Gentlemen, I should probably explain something about Earth's dragon population." Professor Quill, who was still struggling to reconcile his 47 years of dragon research with the reality of a creature who kept offering him cookies shaped like tiny books, managed to squeak out, "Dragon population, as in plural." "Oh my stars, yes," Ember laughed, that wind chime sound filling the cozy cabin. "Did you really think I was the only one? Goodness, what kind of ecological disaster would that be? No, there are dozens of us here. Earth has become something of a retirement community for dragons." The teacup slipped from Vex's scaled fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a crash that would have been dramatically significant if the cup hadn't been made of sturdy ceramic specifically chosen for its resistance to being accidentally dropped by nervous visitors. "Dozens?" Vex's voice cracked like ice on a frozen pond. "Well, let me see." Ember began counting on her claws with the careful precision of someone who'd done this calculation before. "There's Gerald down in Florida. He runs a very successful airboat tour business, though the tourists don't know their guide is technically what they're hoping to see in the Everglades. Then there's Matilda in Oregon. She's got a fantastic food truck that specializes in flame-grilled everything. Oh, and the Thompson twins. Well, they're not actually twins, but they're both named Thompson, which causes endless confusion at the post office. They've got a bed and breakfast in Vermont that's booked solid through next fall." Commander Blast's rocky features had gone completely slack, giving him the expression of a mountain that had suddenly realized it was actually a very large pebble. "You're telling us that dragons run small businesses?" "Well, what else are we going to do?" Ember asked with the kind of practical tone usually reserved for explaining why you need to pay taxes. "Sitting in caves hoarding gold gets boring after the first century or so. And the whole terrorizing villagers thing was never really sustainable as a long-term career plan. Have you tried to find a decent village to terrorize lately? They're all strip malls and chain restaurants now." Jake was practically vibrating with suppressed laughter. Tell them about the monthly meetings, Ember. Oh, the Earth Dragon Integration Society. We meet the first Saturday of every month at the community center in Denver. It's centrally located, and they have excellent parking for those of us who prefer to fly in. We discuss local integration issues, share business tips, and Margaret brings the most amazing potluck dishes. She's the one who taught me the tiramisu recipe. Will's tablet had become completely forgotten in his wing as he stared at Ember with the expression of a scholar who'd just discovered that everything he'd ever written was actually an elaborate work of fiction. Integration issues, he managed to whisper. Oh, you know how it is. Ember waved a claw dismissively. Property zoning regulations for unconventional architecture, fire insurance claims. That's always a nightmare. And don't get me started on the difficulties of getting a driver's license when you're 30 feet long. Though I will say, the DMV staff in Wyoming are surprisingly accommodating once you explain the situation. As if summoned by the conversation, a shadow passed over the cabin windows, followed by the distinctive sound of very large wings touching down outside. Ember's face brightened like a sunrise. Oh, wonderful. That'll be Douglas. He said he might stop by after his shift. The front door opened with a careful precision that spoke of long practice, and another dragon squeezed through the reinforced doorway. This one was slightly smaller than Ember, with deep blue scales that had gone silver around the edges, giving him the distinguished appearance of a dragon who'd earned his retirement. Ember, dear, I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I smelled cookies from 3 miles away and… Oh. Douglas stopped mid-sentence as he noticed the 3 alien visitors who were staring at him with the kind of shocked expression usually reserved for people who'd just watched their reality fold itself into origami. Douglas, perfect timing! Ember clapped her claws together with delight. These gentlemen are from the Galactic Dragon Hunting Consortium. They've come all this way to meet us. Douglas's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on what could only be described as amused sympathy. Oh, you poor things. Still doing the whole hunting the last dragon bit, are you? How charmingly retro. He turned to Ember with the kind of fond exasperation shared between old friends. Did you tell them about the others yet? I was just getting to the good part, Ember grinned. Douglas settled himself carefully onto a reinforced couch that had clearly been designed with dragon proportions in mind. Well, don't let me interrupt. Though I should mention that Beatrice and Harold are flying in from Phoenix tomorrow for the book club meeting. We're discussing the 7 habits of highly effective people this month. Dragons, Vex said slowly, as if testing the words for structural integrity, have book clubs. Oh yes, Douglas nodded seriously. Very enlightening discussions, too, though I must admit Harold gets a bit heated during the philosophy selections. Last month he accidentally set fire to 3 copies of Nietzsche. Ember had to explain to the librarian that it was an artistic statement about the transient nature of nihilism. Jake finally lost the battle with his composure and burst into laughter that echoed through the cabin like a one-man percussion section. You should see your faces, he managed between gasps. This is better than the time I had to explain to that wildlife photographer that the mysterious creature he'd been tracking for 3 days was actually Mrs. Chen, walking her very large dog. Ember looked concerned. Jake, dear, are you all right? You're making that wheezing sound again. I'm fine, Jake wiped tears from his eyes. It's just, they came here expecting to fight the last dragon in the galaxy, and instead they've discovered that dragons have formed a retirement community, complete with small business ownership and monthly book clubs. Douglas tilted his great head thoughtfully. To be fair, we also have a very active quilting circle. Margaret's working on a king-sized quilt with a lovely fire-resistant pattern. And don't forget the softball league, Ember added helpfully, though we did have to switch to titanium bats after the 3rd incident. Commander Blast, who had been silent for so long that moss might have started growing on his rocky exterior, finally found his voice. How many of you are there? On Earth? Douglas considered this seriously. Last count was somewhere around 47, though that was before the Henderson family moved in from Rigel. They're lovely people, very quiet neighbors, though their youngest has been going through a rebellious phase and keeps accidentally melting street signs. 47, Quill repeated faintly. Well, 48 if you count Reginald, but he's technically only here part-time. He spends winters in Cabo, something about his scales getting dry in the cold weather. The 3 hunters sat in stunned silence, watching their entire careers, their life's work, and their understanding of the universe dissolve like sugar cubes in hot tea. They had spent decades, maybe centuries, hunting creatures that had apparently been living better lives than they had, running successful businesses, and participating in community activities that sounded suspiciously like the kind of suburban existence most beings could only dream of. "So," Ember said gently, refilling teacups with the careful attention of someone who'd noticed that her guests appeared to be having some sort of existential crisis, "what exactly were you planning to do when you found us?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a campfire, and for the first time in their illustrious careers as galactic dragon hunters, Vex, Quill, and Blast found themselves completely at a loss for words. What do you say when your entire life's purpose has just been revealed to be not only unnecessary but also slightly embarrassing? Vex opened his mouth several times, producing sounds that might have been words if words were allowed to give up halfway through and wander off to contemplate their life choices. Finally, he managed to croak out, "We were going to kill us?" Douglas suggested helpfully, with the tone of someone offering to pass the salt. "Yes, that does seem to be the traditional approach, though I must say, it's been decades since anyone tried. The last attempt was from some fellow called Griselda the Merciless, and she ended up staying for 3 weeks after Beatrice taught her how to knit. Lovely woman, terrible at cable stitches." Commander Blast stared down at his massive rocky hands, which suddenly seemed ridiculously oversized for holding delicate teacups. I have 37 different types of dragon-slaying weapons back on the ship," he said quietly. "I spent 200 years collecting them." "Oh my." Ember's eyes widened with genuine interest. "That sounds like quite a collection. I love collecting things. Would you like to see my bookmark collection? I have one from every library on 17 different worlds." "I wrote the definitive guide to dragon behavioral patterns," Quill whispered, his feathers drooping like a wilted flower. 47 years of research, 732 pages of analysis on hunting strategies and territorial aggression." "How fascinating," Douglas perked up. "I'd love to read it. Is it available in digital format? Margaret's starting a non-fiction book club next month, and we're always looking for new material. Though you might want to consider adding a chapter on property tax negotiations. That's become surprisingly relevant." Jake, who had been watching this exchange with the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting years for this exact moment, finally decided to put everyone out of their misery. "Gentlemen, let me ask you something. What exactly are you going back to when you leave here?" The 3 hunters looked at each other with the dawning realization that this was not a question they were prepared to answer. "I mean, think about it," Jake continued, settling back in his chair like a man enjoying his favorite part of a well-told story. "Your whole career was built around hunting the last dragons in the galaxy. But there are no last dragons. They're just a bunch of middle-aged retirees who figured out that Earth has excellent healthcare, reasonable property taxes, and really good internet infrastructure. Plus the humans are surprisingly accepting of unusual neighbors," Ember added. "Do you know how refreshing it is to live somewhere that people's response to finding out you're a dragon is usually, 'Oh, cool, do you mind helping me light my barbecue?'" Vex's scales had lost their shimmer and taken on the dull sheen of someone experiencing a profound identity crisis. But we're dragon hunters. It's what we do. It's what we are." "Where," Jake corrected gently. "Past tense. Now you're just 3 beings who've traveled a very long way to discover that their job doesn't exist anymore." Douglas leaned forward with the kind of earnest expression that suggested he was about to offer life advice. "You know, we've all been through career transitions. I used to be in territorial defense. Spent 3 centuries guarding mountain passes and challenging knights to single combat. Do you know how boring that gets? Same job. Day after day. Fight night. Win fight. Go back to cave. Repeat. No vacation time. No retirement benefits. And don't get me started on the working conditions." "What do you do now?" Commander Blast asked, and for the first time since they'd landed he sounded genuinely curious rather than homicidally determined. "Air traffic control at Denver International," Douglas said proudly. "Turns out having excellent vision, the ability to fly, and experience with aerial navigation makes you surprisingly qualified for managing aircraft movements. Plus, the benefits package is fantastic, and I get discounts on airline tickets, though I rarely need them." Amber clapped her claws together with excitement. "And I volunteer at 3 libraries. I'm treasurer of the local historical society, and I just got certified as a conflict mediator. Turns out being large and fireproof makes you excellent at breaking up arguments." "The point is," Jake said, "you all have skills that could translate beautifully to civilian life. Vex, you've got leadership experience and interstellar travel knowledge. Quill, you're obviously a brilliant researcher with an eye for detail, and Blast, well, Controlled demolition is a legitimate and well-paying profession. You mean, Quill's voice was barely a whisper, you mean we could stay? Of course you could stay. Ember's enthusiasm was infectious, like a dragon-sized golden retriever who'd just been asked if she wanted to go for a walk. Earth has plenty of room, and we're always looking for new community members. Douglas, didn't you mention that the HOA was looking for new board members? Indeed they were, Douglas nodded sagely. Though I should warn you, the monthly meetings can get quite heated. Last month there was a 45-minute argument about lawn ornament regulations that nearly ended in actual violence. Mrs. Patterson threatened to call the police when Gerald suggested that pink flamingos were aesthetically offensive. I could help with that, Blaze said suddenly, his rocky features brightening for the first time all day. I'm very good at controlled explosions, maybe too good at uncontrolled ones too, but I'm working on that. Jake grinned. See? Natural problem solver. As the afternoon sun began to set through the cabin windows, painting everything in warm golden light, something fundamental shifted in the room. The three beings who had arrived as legendary dragon hunters were slowly transforming into something they'd never expected to be: potential neighbors. There is one thing I should probably mention, Jake said, his grin taking on a slightly mischievous edge. The job comes with some pretty interesting benefits. Such as? Vex asked, though his tone suggested he was almost afraid to hope. Well, let's just say that Earth's approach to interspecies relations has been so successful that we've been asked to consult on some other situations. Apparently there's a whole bunch of supposedly extinct species from across the galaxy that have actually just moved to better neighborhoods. The Galactic Council is starting to realize that maybe their approach to conflict resolution could use some work. Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful mountain landscape, where smoke signals were still rising from Gary's chess moves, and the evening wildlife was beginning to emerge for their nightly routines. Congratulations, gentlemen, he said, turning back to face three former dragon hunters who were now looking at him with expressions of hopeful bewilderment. You've just been promoted from Galaxy's most feared predator eliminators to interspecies relationship consultants. It's the same skill set, but instead of hunting things, you'll be helping them find good neighborhoods and decent schools for their kids. 6 months later, Captain Vex Thornscale was the 3-time running champion of the Earth Dragon Integration Society's monthly trivia night, specializing in questions about galactic politics and obscure regulations. Professor Quill Finbottom had published a best-selling book titled So You Think You Know Dragons, a complete guide to interspecies friendship, which had become required reading in xenobiology courses across 17 star systems. Commander Blast Rockfist had founded the most successful controlled demolition company in the Pacific Northwest, and had developed a reputation for being able to remove any structure with surgical precision and absolutely no collateral damage. And Jake Morrison? Jake got that promotion to Interspecies Relations Coordinator, which came with a salary bump, comprehensive health coverage, and the kind of job satisfaction that comes from knowing you've helped make the universe a slightly more reasonable place. But perhaps most importantly, he finally got to afford the good coffee, the really good coffee, the kind that doesn't taste like it was filtered through old socks and existential dread. Some might say that's the most human victory of all, turning a potential intergalactic incident into an excuse for better workplace benefits and premium caffeine access. And really, isn't that what true diplomacy is all about?